Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I'm wrapping up Mega Man's Game Boy lineup with Mega Man 5, released in 1994. Once again outsourced to Minakuchi, this game took the longest out of all the 5 titles to develop. In addition to being the only Game Boy game with fully unique content and robot masters, this would also be the last time the classic 8-bit Mega Man sprite got used for a game, up until the release of Mega Man 9 14 years later. Because of this uniqueness, many consider this game Minakuchi's Magnum Opus, the best of the Game Boys and arguably better than all 6 NES games. Though keep in mind that GB4 had quite the big glow up going from GB3, and there's of course the glorious reputation backing up Mega Man 2, my favorite of the NES games. So how does my thought process factor into this? Well, I know for sure Mega Man V clears most of the NES titles, but is it really the best 8-bit Mega Man game? Is it really that good of a game for me to even consider processing that question? Or does it fall a bit behind its expectations? Whatever the answer is, I'm excited to go in depth and dissect this one in half. With no Game Boy curse to stop me, let's jump right in. Mega Man GB5. Let's get the immediate positives out of the way. The uniqueness of GB5 works to its benefit, obviously, as it breaks the established trend from all prior Game Boy games of recycling content from the NES games. The only things that are really recycled, quote-unquote, are series staples and mechanics, like Mega Man's gameplay and his partners Rush and Eddie. Beyond that, GB5 has unique stages, new enemies, mid-bosses, bosses, and weapons, all of which can only be found and experienced here in a unique Game Boy package. This also makes it easy to call GB5 the definitive Mega Man experience on the Game Boy. Since everything is incorporated into the Game Boy's specs, nothing really feels like it got lost in the translation, so if you had to play only one out of the 5 Game Boy games, it's very easy to pick GB5. A lot of thought will have to be put into saying otherwise. When it comes to the OST, listening to it just once would be doing it a disservice. There's a lot of skill covered through each composition, like with the opening cinematic's tone shift from very simple major chord progressions to these dissonant tritone bangings. Although all the main stage songs share the same tempo, they're each distinctively crafted to define catchy in many definitions. There's the melancholy nature of songs like Mercury's and Neptune's themes, the emotional drive in tunes like Mars and Pluto's themes, contrasted by more bouncy pieces like Venus and Jupiter's themes. I would say Uranus and Saturn's themes are my favorite, but I also really like the Wily Star theme for how sinister it is. Even the Password theme manages to rock out. Go listen to that one if you haven't already. It's all in all a really strong selection of music, definitely one of the better Mega Man soundtracks out there. Presentation and graphics are also very good too. Everything is clearly defined and cutscenes are given great care to communicate the story, sometimes even with different artwork perspectives of Mega Man, although it's not as crazy or committed to this as GB4. Still, GB5 has a unique stage select layout showing your eventual progression from Earth to the outer planets, and every stage can tell a story despite the monochrome limitations. I also really like the weapon get artwork of Mega Man. It's surprisingly rare to see him smile, let alone pull off a more conniving smirk, like he's actually excited about collecting new weapons to use against his enemies. GB5 also has a very noticeable attention to detail, with a lot of care put in to make this concluding game an extended shout out to the fans. In the opening cutscene, a quick observation reveals that Mega Man's Charge Buster had the same kickback from GB4, and one of Sunstar's attacks is actually an enhanced edit of that same charge shot's full power, only seen if you game over too many times. There's even stuff like Dark Moon's weakness being a subtle reference to Yellow Devil Mark II's own primary weakness. The robot masters in this game call themselves the Star Droids, a group who came from space to try and conquer Earth. They definitely play into their uniqueness, with some having powers we haven't even seen before. Mercury, for example, can dissolve into a puddle of goop to protect himself from damage, but even without that, he can use Grab Buster to steal any type of goodie from you, including your hard-earned S-Tanks. I bet that's enough to leave a long-lasting impression, but my favorites of this group would be Saturn and Uranus, as they have the coolest designs and play into them during their fights. As for the others, they take enough inspiration from previous Robot Masters to fit in line with the world of Mega Man while still doing their own thing. And even the opposite holds true with Pluto, who inspired the design of future Robot Master Slash Man. The leader of these Star Droids is Terra, who manages to give off a strong impression as a new rival to Mega Man. Although he plays a similar role to the Mega Man killers of before, he holds the honor of being the only character in the classic series who has canonically defeated Mega Man in battle, as his extraterrestrial armor made him invincible to the Earth-developed Mega Buster. So each time he appears on the stage select later down the road, there's a sense of dread coming from the fact that Mega Man actually lost to this guy. The original story itself manages to progressively ramp up, adding more to the stakes as the game goes on. After Mega Man's defeat, we learn that there's more Star Droids attacking the cities, and not even they can be defeated thanks to their alien material. After the first group is defeated, Dr. Light informs Mega Man of a second group who's coordinating an all-out attack from the outer planets, forcing Mega Man to take the battle to them deep in space. And it even comes with a nice cutscene of him inside the Rushcraft. And just when you thought it was over after Terra's death, the looming size of the Wily Star confirms the true mastermind of it all. Unlike some of the previous games that did a plot twist of Wily being behind everything, I actually think this was done really well, because you're led to believe that the Star Droids who come from space were conquering Earth on their own terms. So the realization of Wily actually controlling this ancient civilization of superior robots says a lot about how powerful he really is. I also like how Mega Man himself is given dialogue across the game's length, instead of just at the very end. He only has a few conversations across the game, like with Dr. Light or himself after completing a mission. It's not like he's talking all the time, but even him suggesting to Dr. Light that it's better to take the fight to the Star Droids in space helps give him more of a backbone. And he's not devoid of humor, with the awkward timing of, "Oops, that was close," being a fun quote. Unfortunately, the story has several cutscenes that cannot be skipped or sped up, which is strange because this isn't the case with all of them. The opening cinematic and the first interaction with Dr. Light can be skipped, and you can reach the stage select right away. But any conversation with Terra from this point on, for example, is unskippable. It's a weird case where the game could have let you skip them, but it doesn't. So you usually either have to wait a cutscene out or keep scrolling through dialogue that you've already seen many times over. In order to give Mega Man a chance against the Star Droids, Dr. Light analyzes their material and provides Mega Man a fun altercation to his Charge Buster. The Mega Arm is, and I quote, "the most powerful weapon ever devised." Wow, way to suck your own dick in front of the whole class, game. But really, Mega Arm really does more than look like a Hard Knuckle clone. The half charge actually does 2 damage, which I personally really like. But most importantly, the Mega Arm has more limited range. It can still travel pretty far when fully charged, and since the fist has to come back to Mega Man, you can engage enemies not just on the same Y-axis as Mega Man, because the returning hand can do damage too. The most noticeable flaw is that Mega Man cannot attack while his arm is fired, but I actually think this creates a reasonable downside to using the Mega Arm, as you trade an extra burst of power for temporary vulnerability. The game even uses this against you in a few parts of the game, but never in a frustrating manner. It tasks you with being a bit more strategic about firing off the Mega Arm, and knowing how to protect yourself while it's detached. The Mega Arm even has purchasable upgrades, and by directly upgrading your default weapon, the shop becomes much more relevant to the Mega Arm in a way that no other upgrade does. My favorite is the Magnet Hand, which lets the Mega Arm grab items and save you a lot of trouble. You can grab any goodie in the game, and unlike the Ring Boomerang from GB4, it does not cost any weapon energy to do so, and combos perfectly with the energy balancer. You can also get the Rockin' Claw, which can latch onto enemies and squeeze them for even more damage, which at times can become the most damaging attack in the game. I also like the nice little detail of you being able to leave the shop early before you even talk to Dr. Light. This was also a thing in GB4, but since the Mega Arm upgrades are more expensive, this tactic is more useful for checking up on your P-chip count to see if you've reached the price. I'm not a big fan of Rockin' Claw though, because the squeeze cannot be controlled or triggered on your own. As far as I'm aware, it's completely random when it happens, and in fact, the instruction manual actually lies about this. Advice number 2 says you need to press the shoot button repeatedly, but in reality, you don't actually have to do this, nor does pressing the shoot button repeatedly affect anything. Such a strange upgrade. The shop itself has a problem of its own. If you go for both Mega Arm upgrades and the energy balancer, as in the most handy upgrades, it will leave you very little room to buy anything else. By comparison, GB4 always gave me the opportunity to seek out W tanks every now and then, and eventually build up to an S tank. But with GB5, that's only the case if I pick the most profitable order, like going to Mars' stage with Rush Coil or doing Pluto first in the second set so I can backtrack to him later. GB5 also repeats the mechanic that GB4 had, where there's an upgrade for your Charge Buster locked behind game overing too many times. In fact, you can actually upgrade the Mega Arm twice this way, after a total of 8 game overs. I know the Mega Arm becomes like crazy, almost ROM hack kind of fast once it gets to its full power with all those turbo accelerators, but how bad do you have to be to actually see this happen to you? Yikes. You are also not given a chance to go back to the shop after the Wily Star reveal. I know that the only thing you do before that is fight Terra, and he doesn't even have a stage to himself. But I take issue with this because GB4 made sure to give Mega Man one final chance to use the shop after the Wily Battleship reveal, and it was a helpful way of building up anticipation for the final level. But GB5 doesn't do this, which is very strange given its attention to detail with everywhere else. If you've come to this game looking for an impressive challenge, you may be disappointed, as GB5 leans a bit too much on the easy side. Most stages have big health pickups right in front of you, often in places where they can't be avoided. And outside of a few exceptions, gimmicks are not taken to their full potential. That's not to say these challenges are inherently bad. In fact, most of them are executed well and end on a good note. But at the end of the day, it does leave me wishing that this game could have pushed its unique concepts a bit further, especially in the Wily Star level. But we'll get there soon. In direct contrast to this, GB5 has way too many spike drops throughout the game. They aren't even traditional spike drops, usually just single rooms with spikes placed in random positions around the room, or in a large pit you have to move away from. Pluto's stage introduces its main platform gimmick over spikes. Uranus' stage has this one room where you're expected to do a rather tight maneuver through spikes with these moving platforms. And meanwhile, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and especially the Wily Star all have areas where the game can very easily kill you for falling in the wrong spot. Alongside the Mega Arm, Mega Man is also introduced to Tango, a new animal assistant and something of a curio for the classic series. Directly replacing Beat from GB4, Tango serves as the opposite to Rush. Whereas the dog serves as a multi-utility companion unlocked after beating certain stages, the cat can directly attack enemies by rolling into them. He's also available at the start of the game, giving Mega Man a nice crutch early on. Tango has a good number of enemies he can one-shot too, such as the jumping monkeys, the saw blade enemies, but even if he doesn't one-shot them, he can do a lot of damage. He's also very effective against the owl fans and especially the Mets with shields and tank treads. One problem with Tango though is that he tends to move in random areas where enemies are nowhere to be found. You cannot influence Tango's movement in any way, so he can very much take his sweet time reaching the enemy you want him to defeat, or just fall down a pit accidentally. Just like a real cat, his independence can cause trouble for you. Eddie is thankfully more common to come across in this game, and it seems like cheesing Eddie in most setups actually takes a bit more work to do so. Only one Eddie setup has you enter the room with the ladder, while 2 other Eddie rooms have the ladder behind him, thus you might have to actually dodge Eddie's pickup if you want to cheese him. There's actually one setup where you enter through a slide gap, and trying to cheese Eddie is actually impossible. I do like the attempt of making the possibility of cheesing Eddie a bit more difficult. It's like the devs were aware of this design flaw, but decided to work around it, with a band-aid solution of sorts. Proto Man also returns in this game, filling the same role he did in GB4. In fact, there's 2 mandatory encounters with him out of a possible 5. The first being in Pluto stage, gives Mega Man a chance at a free S-Ball that can restore his goodies, and before the final set of bosses, Proto Man appears one last time to see you off. Even though he may not always give you the item you want, I appreciate his reoccurrence acting as a reminder that Mega Man is never alone on these missions, despite how easy it is to believe so. When it comes to the new stages, they have very memorable set pieces that can leave off a positive impression and add to the game's unique charm. Mercury has a giant compactor press that rises down and up, different from prior games by having it be the floor trying to crush you, and actually interacting with the GSQ projectiles. Neptune does something similar at the beginning with the submarine rising up and down, which affects your altitude against the flying high-away copters. This same stage also features these cracked pipes that release rushing water or harmful steam if shot, and they often placed in ways that punish players for using Mega Arm excessively. Saturn has probably the most realized gimmick by having gravities that shift from letting you jump high to weighing you down, while Venus has the most unique set pieces. Waterfalls that make ladders slippery to move on and push you through the floor to your doom, entire floors of bouncy bubbles that affect your jump height. You never see this kind of stuff in other Mega Man games. Before I talk about the stages though, I think the way some of these gimmicks are constructed take too much advantage of the fact that hit stun lasts way too long in the Game Boys, which can actually be a detriment for some of them. Like if you get hurt while standing on a rushing water stream in Neptune stage, or a conveyor belt in Mercury stage, it's almost a guarantee you'll be swept into a pit. Same goes for the rotating platforms in Uranus' stage, which can explain why there's only a few scenarios where you may have to fight something on these platforms, because getting hit on them traps you in the hit stun long enough for you to be disposed of. I've said this before, but each stage also manages to carry out a unique theme that can be deciphered with enough inspection. Mercury being in a trash compacting factory won't make too much sense at first until you play through a stage, while Venus's hallways are riddled with soapy bubbles, implying the sense that this is a laboratory. I also like the density of pickups all across each stage. There's not too much that it can feel overwhelming, but it helps the stages feel lived in and worth looting for valuable treasure. Each stage has something valuable too, be it 1-ups, E-tanks, or those special crystals, pickups galore. When it comes to mini E-tanks though, they are still less common than both 1-ups and regular E-tanks. Aside from a few stages where mini E-tanks are plentiful, their potential was wasted by not having them be more common, and I feel like the devs recognized this, because while W-tanks and S-tanks made it to the mainline games like with Mega Man 7, mini E-tanks would never leave the Game Boy lineup. When it comes to the first 4 stages, I like the routing decision that was crafted behind either picking Venus or Mars first. Venus is the one who gives Rush Coil after his defeat, and Rush Coil is needed for a lot of goodies in Mars' stage. You can get many P-chips and even a free E-tank simply for having Rush Coil, but this also means you have to fight Venus without his weakness, that being Mars' weapon, Photon Missile. Conversely, you can go to Mars' stage first to sacrifice those extra goodies in exchange for an easier fight with Venus later down the road. Very interesting stuff. As for the second 4 stages, each of them holds 1 of 4 crystals belonging to an ancient civilization. Finding these crystals adds an extra layer of exploration, as they are all found off the beaten path. It is absolutely worth getting them, as Dr. Light will create a power generator that reduces all ammo consumption by half. Not only will this reward be super handy for the Wily Star and let you goof around with any weapon, but it's also free. You already did the payment by going out of your way for the crystals. If there's one thing that sucks about the 4 crystals, it's that you're forced to backtrack at least once. This is because both Pluto and Uranus give you block-removing weapons, and both of their crystals require the other one's weapon to break blocks leading to the crystal. I wouldn't mind this at all if you could exit stages after collecting them, but GB5 does not let you. You actually have to make it to the end in order to leave, which is compounded by the fact that these stages are slower paced and lean on the longer side. You only have one checkpoint before the boss hallway too, and that one spike section in Uranus stage is sure to remind you of that, keeping you longer in the stage than you would want. And when I say these stages are slower paced, I'm mostly referring to the enemies having radically different weakness tables to your weapons. Many of them have their fair shot of one-shot weaknesses, which is always something I appreciate, but the way GB5 places its enemies, it rarely has one enemy type fought multiple times in a row. Thus, you'll be spending a lot of time in the pause menu each time you come across a new enemy. In Jupiter stage, for example, the outside sections alternate between Beery Sparks, who are weak to salt water and bubble bomb, and Beery Berries, who aren't weak to either of them. In fact, they aren't weak to anything outside a black hole or deep digger, so using anything other than the Mega Arm can be a detriment. Don't get me wrong though, the enemy cast for this game is actually just as interesting as the new stage designs. The most common are these hammer fellows, who look like Puka from Dig Dug, and despite how often they appear, dawn catches are always kept fresh, thanks to interacting with the stages, like in Jupiter stage, where being outside allows their attack to cover more area. Venus's bubbly halls have enemies camouflaged with the terrain. Mars' stage has a lot of thematic enemies that help sell the military theming, like with homing missiles and sentient rockets, while Saturn's stage has a psychic enemy known as Foolie, who appears very often to slow down time and make projectile dodging more tricky. I do have a lot of problems with the enemies though. The most obnoxious fellow in the game has to be these magnet fellows called Beery Spark. Appearing in 2 stages, these fellows are fast and rather tanky for their speed. Beyond that, they are quick to release these large sparks that are also fast, scale the terrain, and have very large hitboxes. It's not too much a problem in Jupiter stage, where you have more wiggle room to jump over them, provided the enemy isn't on top of you. But the more narrower corridors in Pluto stage can make their attacks feel impossible to dodge. They do have weaknesses to Bubble Bomb and Salt Water, but Bubble Bomb is too slow to kill them in time, and Salt Water can only stop their attack if you know their exact placements so you can throw a good shot. GB5 also has a lot of enemies that may appear only twice or even thrice across the game. Not only does it limit their ability to show off their unique behaviors in more interesting situations, but it brings to question if the devs had actual plans for these enemies after they used up their plans for the other ones, because you can definitely tell which enemies hog up the spotlight in their respective stages and which ones get sidelined. Let's go through a list, shall we? Sashi Breaker, 3 times. Baby Flies, 2 times. Fankuro, 3 times. Elekit, 2. Bayous, 2. Boostin, 2. Handu, 3. It just doesn't make sense. But believe me when I say that there are 2 special cases of enemies only appearing once in the entire game. Ooh, this got me angry. So angry I almost contemplated splitting these 2 into their own cons because of my frustrations thinking about how badly this issue slipped under the radar. Twice! So you can thank Max Wellington for keeping me in check. Mercury stage has this fellow, Tamp. He teleports above you so he can slam down, and he's weak to Bubble Bomb. Sounds like he'd be perfect to use alongside the many conveyor belts. And like all other enemies, he got his own set of artwork, only for the level designers to completely forget about him. The one that got me worked up the most is something I only found about recently. In Venus' stage, you have these crab enemies called Fevers, who create large bubbles that can trap you and drag you into pits. Fun concept, and they even reappear in the Wily Star, But what you don't remember is that there is one unique variation of this behavior tucked away in this optional path. A variation whose bubbles are smaller and allows Mega Man to stand on them. Wanna know why I didn't know about this until last week? Because each Fever variant looks and animates the exact same. I didn't think twice about killing that one because I could just rush over the spikes anyway. And since I have Spark Chaser, it can't even survive long enough to show you that it's different. You're not even required to use those bubbles to traverse this room anyway. Thank goodness, because staying on those bubbles is actually very janky. It's problems like this where I refuse to believe this game could be as awesome as everyone says it is, with, you know, how poorly the game juggles all its unique enemies together. How does this not get brought up in conversation more? One of the game's most well-known and praised aspects secretly doubles as arguably its biggest shortcoming. It's an outrage, a scandal! I do have more to talk about though, so let's continue. As far as weapons go, many of them are powerful and useful in different circumstances. Grabbuster always does 2 damage flat, but it allows Mega Man to steal health from enemies. Even if the health can struggle to reach you, it's very handy if you took too much damage. Bubble Bomb is probably the strongest of the first 4 weapons. Despite having this meddlesome trajectory, it packs an explosive punch and a lot of ammo to ensure you don't run out. Electric Shock is a strong close-range weapon that can multi-hit if enemies stay inside it, while Break Dash provides invincibility even if your attack got blocked by an enemy shield. Black Hole may seem odd at first, but it's a very good screen nuke. By sucking in all the weak enemies to your head, all their goodies will drop right on top of you, and the following spiral will finish off the tougher enemies who couldn't get sucked up. The weapon you get from Terra, Spark Chaser, is a great final weapon that shreds through everything and makes you feel all powerful. You only get to use it in the Wily Star, but this laser is fast and seeks out enemies like it's out for blood. It even tears through shield defenses like what the Tank Vets have. It's up there for one of the most OP weapons in Mega Man history, but since you can only use it in the final level, it doesn't get much time to shine. A few of the weapons are a bit harder to use and could come off as awkward. I know Photon Missile and Saltwater have many one-shot weaknesses across the game, but they are not easy to use. Photon Missile is a more extreme version of Hard Knuckle. It doesn't move at all before accelerating to top speed. You could definitely play around with that by placing missiles in front of enemies so they run into it, but the missile won't be able to pierce until it actually moves. Saltwater is one of those weapons where the smaller blobs do the same damage as the one main blob. This hardly matters with one-shot weaknesses, as you could just use the big blob and call it a day. But for anyone else, you have to splash it near a surface so the small blobs can hit multiple times. It's harder than it sounds, despite being able to influence the trajectory in many ways, as Saltwater uses more ammo than most weapons. Thus, you aren't given much wiggle room to adjust your trajectories. The worst weapon, though, is Deep Digger. It absolutely sucks, and is definitely a contender for one of the worst Mega Man weapons of all time. It functions just like that of Super Arm, where the stage supplies your ammunition. But what sucks about it is how these blocks are placed. 95% of the time, they're placed on top of goodies, with the intent being that you need the weapon to get the blocks out of your way. But this is made redundant by the fact that Mega Arm can grab through these blocks, and as hot of a take this is, I'm actually glad this is a case, because it's a necessary evil I can accept. See, every stage in the second half, except for Uranus obviously, requires Deep Digger for most of its goodies, including the most valuable ones like 1-ups, E-tanks, and crystals. So in the what-if scenario that GB5 didn't let you grab items with Mega Arm, that would require a whole lot more backtracking than what the game already asks of you. You'd basically have to go to Uranus first in order to minimize that backtracking as much as possible. All these blocks aren't even placed in convenient locations for you to throw at enemies, which sucks because in the few times that you can use it for offense, it's super powerful. Oh well, it could have been a whole lot worse and did way less damage or something. I praised the Star Droids beforehand with their unique powers, but what about their actual fights? Well, this is another one of GB5's core problems, as most of them are either way too easy or boring. I did compliment Mercury's abilities, but the one thing that spoils his fight is that every time he gets hit, he stops using the Grab Buster, thus keeping him in his goop form where you're kinda just twiddling your thumbs. All Neptune does is hop around while throwing out attacks every now and then, a pattern without much backbone at all. Uranus also has a very shallow attack pool, and most of the time he can't do anything to you because he spends too much time jumping to shake the ground, as if like that's gonna do anything. The worst case is Jupiter. Most of the time he's high up in the ceiling trying to track you, but you can always avoid him by staying away. And the way he dives down, it's like he wants you to shoot him. Without the weakness, that fight Buster only is very tedious. The other 4 bosses are a bit better overall though. Venus has a bit more of a technical approach, Sunstar has quicker reflexes to his attacks, and both Mars and Pluto each have longer patterns that are scripted. But still, nobody really sticks out as the one you should save your E-Tanks for. Like, you're telling me that the only reason these guys actually took over most of Earth's major cities was because the writing said so. Terra especially is a letdown, despite the game's narrative doing everything it can to hype him up. Terra's only real attack is his Spark Chaser, which is much slower compared to how Mega Man uses it. He does have a paralysis beam, but it only exists to give him a free hit with that Spark Chaser. All while he attacks, he can spend the entire fight staying still. But every time you get close to him, he teleports away like he's suddenly scared of Mega Man. Also, his weakness being the most obvious one out of any boss in the game, and the fact that it's the worst weapon in the game, is both funny and just plain sad. Poor Terra. If he ever shows up again, Mega Man should just tell Proto Man to use his thinking laser instead and save me the trouble. There's also a whack weakness chain among the 9 star droids, probably the most confusing one in the whole series. See, with the first 4, there are only 2 star droids who could be beaten with their weakness. Neptune beats Mars, beats Venus. But Venus's weapon does only 1 damage to Mercury, cutting off a miniature chain from there. In fact, Mercury and Neptune can't even be beaten with their weaknesses until the rematches. So for the first time around, you're pretty much forced to fight them Buster only. With the second set, the opposite is true. Only Saturn and Uranus have weaknesses to the other 2 in their set, while Jupiter and Pluto are weak to weapons of the first 4. This means for the latter 2, you will always have their weaknesses coming into their fights, a design choice that isn't properly balanced at all. On the plus side, there's a few fancy kills you can do on a few mid-bosses and bosses, serving as extra ways you can dispatch them. With Tyhorn here, you can actually stand on top of his head. Although this does nothing for your Mega Arm, it does wonders for a Bubble Bomb and lets you kill the mid-boss easily. Uranus is similar to Metal Man in that his own weapon can defeat him instantly, but not in the way you expect. Rather, each time he stomps, he restores the floor, so when he takes a breather to throw a block forward, you need to lift up the 4 blocks beneath him ASAP and switch weapons to get rid of the blocks you're holding. It's very technical and difficult to pull off consistently, but when done right, Uranus will plummet to the chasm below for an instant KO. The Brain Crusher's first phase is defeated by pushing the bomb enemies close to the boss, so it gets hurt by the explosion. So naturally, it's invincible to every other weapon. However, if you use iframes from getting hurt or even from break dash, you can just walk a little bit further inside the Brain Crusher and hit it with a direct black hole. If you defeat the boss with this weapon, not only do you skip the second phase completely, it also skips all the defeat animations and abruptly transitions to the following cutscene. That one really caught me off guard when I first pulled it off. On the subject of Brain Crusher, GB5 manages to have a good variety of fortress bosses across the game. Outside of the bombs, the Brain Crusher earns its name from its use of overhead missiles and an enemy who uses anti-gravity to send you to the spike ceiling. It always feels good smacking that enemy to disable the effect, especially if you use the Mega Arm to squeeze it to death in one shot. Before the Brain Crusher are the Twin Knuckles, and although they are very simple, there is a good progression from the L Knuckle to the R Knuckle. Not just in the obvious speed change, but the R Knuckle knows a few extra attacks to spice up the pattern more. And ironically, you can even kill the R Knuckle faster if you're good enough. The game's middle stage in between the 2 Star Droid sets isn't actually a stage, but instead features a boss fight against Dark Moon, the Game Boy's take on a devil. Although this one is much easier than both the original Yellow Devil and Mark II, it still brings some uniqueness with those fancy legs, as well as mixing a bit of Mark II's perks. I also think the weakness was well chosen, as it takes some good practice to land multiple hits, and if you're good enough, he can be defeated on the second cycle. Perfect weakness length. After the reveal of the Wily Star, Mega Man wastes no time on the realization and hitches a ride on Rush through space to reach it, a function I have recently dubbed the Rushcraft, because frankly I can't bring myself to call it Rush Space. In the few times that Mega Man went to space in the previous Game Boy titles, the Rushcraft merely existed to show you how you got there, but GB5 lets you actually pilot the Rushcraft in a continuation of what was established by the Marine Bike section back in Mega Man 5. Each section of this stage has a unique obstacle, with the first chunk having these meteorites which must be avoided, perfect for testing out Rushcraft's unlimited boosting. The second chunk has these Malmets swarming from everywhere, only really made annoying by their much longer iframes. Still, Rushcraft can use charge shots to weaken them, and if you're ever getting beaten up, you can actually pause the menu to use an E-Tank. The third section sees you dodging some massive lasers, great set piece by the way, before your sprite actually shrinks to show the scale of the Wily Star's Skull Blazer. Despite being a slow-paced fight, it's really impressive seeing Mega Man and Rush work together to take down an enemy this huge, having to dodge those same lasers and cannons shooting all types of stuff at you. Despite that Rushcraft section leaving off a very good impression for what's to come, the rest of the Wily Star is unfortunately the worst stage in the game. Although it is also the longest stage in the game, that length doesn't feel earned because of how much it drags. None of the enemy combat here is engaging. It's like the previous 8 stages exhausted all the game's creative juices. Plus, with Spark Chaser on your side, nothing can stop you. Outside of some enemy reskins, the stage has nothing new going for it, just using whatever past gimmick it could grab and throwing them around without any rhyme or reason. Even with 2 areas that feature paths branching off and converging together, you're always better off going down, because that yields more rewards in generally safer environments. I should also mention, since the game at this point has given up hope on good challenge, the 1-ups and E-Tanks are all free. Even after the rematches, you are dumped with 2 E-Tanks back to back and goodies galore in a straightaway path. I know the game wants to make sure you're prepared for the last few bosses, but seriously, Proto Man at the bottom could provide an S-ball that renders most of those weapon pickups meaningless. If there's one thing the indoor Wily Star wants to be remembered for, it's that all 3 of the Mega Man killers from the previous Game Boy games come back for one last hurrah. Enker from Dr. Wily's Revenge is a bit slower as he holds out his Mirror Buster longer, and he's the only enemy in the game where the Mega Arm squeeze works 100% of the time. In fact, his original damage table was kept, thus only Mega Arm can damage him. I know he's a little easier here, but it's still cool to see regardless, and I'm excited for what Punk has to offer.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on, boy. Bye. You get your goddamn ugly ass.
So Punk was also made easier to react to. Just like Enker, and having his weakness be salt water lets you approach him in a different way. He does way less damage too, but at least his spinning charge does not snap to the upwards position anymore. Lastly, Ball-Aid fights at the same speed as his first battle in GB4, but now he can throw a big Ball-Aid cracker, something he could only do in his second battle. Interestingly, each of these fights have either clones or statues beforehand, which raises the question if these characters are actually part of those mass-produced clones. I personally don't think so, but I'm interested in what you guys think. So, after you defeat the Brain Crusher, Wily unleashes his last-ditch effort to defeat Mega Man. It's the Star Droid's ancient doomsday weapon, the god they worshipped back in their time. Revealed to be Sunstar, he right away turns on Wily and forces him to retreat. All Sunstar knows is that his purpose is to eradicate all inferior life forms, and he fully delivers in being the first ever final boss for Mega Man who is not Dr. Wily in any capacity. Not only is it a breath of fresh air for someone else to hold this honor, but Sunstar doesn't waste this opportunity. He really is a fantastic final boss whose fight manages to be harder than everyone else. In fact, all the bosses being on the easier side actually benefits Sunstar because it makes his battle feel like a rightfully earned difficulty spike. Sunstar's arena gives Mega Man low gravity like that of Jupiter's stage, so all of his attacks are built around not just that, but also the Game Boy specs as a whole. And despite Sunstar only having one health bar, all his attacks block shots, and he keeps himself invulnerable for just enough time to show off each of his attacks, burning down parts of the floor to better transition across his patterns. My favorite attacks of his are the large laser and a spinning tackle called the Rolling Sun. He even takes a page from Toadman and tries to unleash Destructive Rain, which can only be cancelled if he is shot down. He has no weakness, by the way. Either use Spark Chaser and pray, or get good with regular lemons. Sunstar even gets his own battle theme, which is so awesome that it transcends final boss music, becoming fully associated with Sunstar himself. Definitely one of the best final bosses in the entire series. When all is said and done, GB5 ends with a nice and melancholy ending that suits the finale of the Game Boy era. Mega Man tries to comfort Sunstar after critically damaging him and offers to get him repaired. Sunstar asks why he is showing mercy, and Mega Man responds that he only fights to protect the world and believes that robots and humans can live together in peace. Sunstar never knew this feeling, as peace was unimaginable for his civilization, but he sees the potential in Mega Man achieving it. Although his critical condition eventually takes his life, his explosion decimates the Wily Star and takes it with him. For how little screen time he got, Sunstar's last act of redemption and self-awareness actually felt earned thanks to Mega Man's kindness showing him the light at the end of the tunnel. And back at Earth, Mega Man is busy reflecting on all those star droids until Wily tries to attack him. There's no need for boss music here. He's already defeated, and his UFO knew that before imploding. With nothing left, Dr. Wily bows down to Mega Man before running away, but I'm pretty sure Mega Man caught up to him and sent that geezer to prison. So, we've concluded our dissection with 29 pros and 21 cons. In revisiting that question I had at the beginning, if this game actually is as good as people say it is, I think Mega Man GB5 is the best of the Game Boys, though it was pretty close between that and GB4 in all honesty. Since all the content is naturally made for this handheld, the whole game feels more approachable to pick up and play, despite the overall easier difficulty. However, I just can't bring myself to put this game above Mega Man 2, a game with so much more passion and nuance that delivers what I want in a Mega Man game and leaves me wanting more. But with GB5, I just don't jive with it as much, and comparing the two's issues overall, I'd rather not wallow over GB5's scandalous setbacks on replays. Don't take this the wrong way though, the two games are very close in my eyes, and GB5 is a game definitely worth your time if you haven't played it already. So with that, I'm going to give Mega Man GB5 a rating of 7 out of 10. Good. And that's the end of this review. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment if you have something to say, and as per usual, my Discord server, DeMontropolis, is in the description, so consider joining if you're new to the channel. Since that wraps up all the original 8-bit Mega Man titles for me to review, that just leaves me the boss guides, both for the NES and GB games. As I've said before, my goal is to complete all of these boss guides before I start making a review for Mega Man 7. That's not to say there won't be anything in between though. I did play the 2 DOS games this past month for laughs, but there's no guarantee with those two. Just food for thought, I suppose. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.